The gates of Kensington Palace loomed ahead like a fortress preparing for siege. Sarah could see the additional security vehicles that had been deployed in response to her unprecedented breach of protocol. Black Range Rovers were positioned strategically around the entrance, their occupants undoubtedly senior protection officers and palace officials who would demand immediate explanations for her actions. As they approached the checkpoint, Sarah slowed the vehicle and reached for her radio one final time. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had made peace with the consequences of her choices. Gold Command, Alpha 1 approaching Palace with principal secure and unharmed. Requesting immediate meeting with senior staff to discuss principal welfare concerns and recommended protocol modifications. The response came swiftly, though the voice was different. Someone much higher in the command structure had taken control of the situation. Alpha 1, proceed directly to the main entrance where you will be met by the private secretary and senior protection staff. You are relieved of duties pending full investigation. Charlotte looked up sharply at this announcement. Even at 9 years old, she understood the implications of what she had just heard. Sarah was being punished for protecting her, for choosing her emotional welfare over the rigid demands of royal protocol. "This is my fault," Charlotte said, her voice small and guilty. "You're in trouble because of me." Sarah parked the vehicle at the main entrance and turned to face Charlotte fully, her expression gentle but firm. "Listen to me very carefully, Charlotte. What happened today was not your fault. You are a child who was overwhelmed by adult responsibilities, and that's completely normal and understandable. I am an adult who made a choice to prioritize your well-being, and I would make the same choice again without hesitation." The car doors opened simultaneously as palace staff moved to escort both Sarah and Charlotte inside. But before they could exit the vehicle, Charlotte did something that would be remembered by everyone present for years to come. The 9-year-old princess unbuckled her seatbelt, moved across the car's interior, and wrapped her arms around Sarah Matthews in a fierce hug. The embrace was spontaneous and genuine, free from the careful choreography that usually governed royal interactions. It was simply a grateful child thanking the adult who had listened to her when she needed it most. "Thank you for protecting me," Charlotte whispered, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "Thank you for hearing me when I couldn't be heard." The moment was witnessed by the private secretary, 3 senior protection officers, and 2 ladies-in-waiting who had approached the vehicle. The sight of their future queen embracing a protection officer who had just violated every protocol in the royal handbook created a silence that stretched across the palace courtyard. Sarah returned the hug gently, her own eyes filling with tears she had been trained never to show. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. And remember, your feelings matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As they were separated and led into the palace through different entrances, the investigation began immediately. Sarah found herself in the private secretary's office within minutes, facing a panel of senior officials whose expressions ranged from bewildered to furious. The questions came rapidly and with barely concealed anger at her unprecedented deviation from protocol. "Detective Inspector Matthews," the private secretary began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute compliance. "Your actions today have created an international incident. The media is speculating about everything from terrorist threats to serious illness affecting Princess Charlotte. Hospital administrators are demanding explanations for disappointed children and families. And you have potentially compromised the security protocols that keep our principals safe." Sarah sat straight in her chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Her career was over. That much was certain. But she felt no regret for her actions. If anything, she felt proud of finally prioritizing what truly mattered over what was merely expected. "Sir, I acknowledge that my actions deviated from standard protocol," she said evenly. "However, I maintain that I acted appropriately under Protocol 7 to protect the welfare of my principal when I assessed that her emotional state posed a risk to her psychological well-being." The deputy private secretary leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "You're claiming that a 9-year-old crying constitutes a welfare emergency, requiring evacuation from a hospital visit to sick children?" "I'm stating that a 9-year-old child experiencing acute emotional distress while being forced to perform public duties constitutes a welfare situation requiring immediate intervention, Sarah replied without hesitation. Princess Charlotte was not simply crying. She was exhibiting signs of overwhelming anxiety and emotional exhaustion that made public performance inappropriate and potentially harmful. Meanwhile, in her private apartments, Charlotte was being gently questioned by her governess and a palace counselor who had been summoned to assess her emotional state. The child's honesty about her feelings surprised everyone present. For months, she had been maintaining the facade of a happy, dutiful princess while privately struggling with the pressure of her position. "I was scared," Charlotte admitted to the palace counselor, her voice steady now that she was in a safe environment. "Every time I go out, there are so many people watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I have to smile and wave and remember what to say, and sometimes I just want to hide." The counselor, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, had worked with the royal family for over a decade. She had helped other family members navigate the psychological challenges of public life. But Charlotte's case was unique due to her age and the increasing demands being placed upon her. "Charlotte," Dr. Hartwell said gently, "it's completely normal for someone your age to feel overwhelmed by public attention. Have you been able to talk to anyone about these feelings before today?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "Everyone always tells me how lucky I am and how important my duties are. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or weak. But Sarah listened to me. She understood that I was scared, and she helped me." Back in the private secretary's office, the investigation into Sarah's actions was revealing uncomfortable truths about the pressures being placed on the young princess. When questioned about her assessment of Charlotte's emotional state, Sarah provided detailed observations that painted a picture of a child struggling under impossible expectations. "Over the past 6 months, I have observed Princess Charlotte exhibiting increasing signs of anxiety related to public appearances," Sarah reported. "She has developed pre-engagement rituals that suggest obsessive-compulsive tendencies, including checking her appearance repeatedly and practicing her responses to anticipated questions. Her sleep patterns have been disrupted before major events, and she has lost weight due to what she describes as feeling too nervous to eat." The room fell silent as the implications of these observations sank in. The palace officials had been so focused on preparing Charlotte for her future role that they had failed to recognize the psychological toll their expectations were taking on her present well-being. Dr. Hartwell's assessment of Charlotte corroborated many of Sarah's observations. After spending 2 hours with the princess, the counselor presented her findings to the senior palace staff with a recommendation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about preparing a child for royal duties. "Princess Charlotte is exhibiting classic signs of performance anxiety and chronic stress," Dr. Hartwell reported. "While she is emotionally mature and understands her responsibilities, the current schedule and expectations are developmentally inappropriate for a child her age. I recommend immediate modifications to her public engagement schedule and the implementation of regular psychological support to help her develop healthy coping mechanisms." The recommendation created an immediate crisis in palace planning. Charlotte's public appearances had been carefully scheduled months in advance, with each engagement serving multiple diplomatic, charitable, and public relations purposes. Reducing her schedule would require renegotiating with dozens of organizations and disappointing countless individuals who had planned events around her participation. But the alternative, continuing to overwhelm a child until she suffered more serious psychological damage, was unthinkable. 3 days later, Sarah Matthews sat in her flat in London, reading the official letter that formally ended her career in royal protection. The termination was presented as a mutual agreement to part ways, but everyone involved understood that her breach of protocol had made her position untenable. However, attached to the termination letter was something unexpected, a personal note written in careful, childish handwriting on official palace stationery. "Dear Sarah," the note read, "Mummy and Papa talked to me about what happened. They said you might not be my protection officer anymore because you helped me when I was sad. I want you to know that you are the best protection officer ever because you protected my heart, not just my body. I hope we can be friends always. Love, Charlotte." The note was accompanied by a formal letter from Prince William and Catherine, expressing their gratitude for Sarah's dedication to their daughter's well-being and offering her a position as a private security consultant for the family, a role that would allow her to maintain a relationship with Charlotte while working outside the rigid protocols of official royal protection. 6 months later, Princess Charlotte returned to public engagements with a modified schedule that prioritized her emotional development alongside her royal education. She was accompanied by a new protection detail that had been specifically trained in recognizing and responding to the psychological needs of young royals. But, more importantly, she was accompanied by the knowledge that her feelings mattered, that adults would listen when she expressed distress, and that true strength sometimes meant admitting when you needed help. Sarah Matthews had smashed through more than just the metaphorical barrier of royal protocol that day. She had broken through the dangerous assumption that duty must always come before well-being, that perfection was more important than humanity, and that children could be expected to carry adult responsibilities without adult support. In protecting Princess Charlotte's right to be heard, Sarah had changed the trajectory of a future queen's relationship with service, duty, and the importance of mental health. The small act of listening to a crying child had created ripples that would influence royal protocol for generations to come. Sometimes the most important doors we break down are the ones that have been keeping people trapped inside their own pain, afraid to ask for the help they desperately need. Sarah Matthews reached across the center console and engaged the vehicle's privacy mode, a feature that tinted the windows even darker and activated white noise generators to prevent external surveillance from picking up conversations inside the car. The action was decisive and irreversible. She was officially deviating from protocol in a way that would require extensive explanation later. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her successful in protective services, "I need you to tell me what's wrong. Can you do that for me?" Charlotte's composure finally cracked completely. The tears she had been fighting spilled over as she pressed her hands to her face, her small shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, thick with emotion and the kind of exhaustion that should never burden a child. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I'm so tired of pretending to be happy all the time. I just want to go home and read my books and not have everyone staring at me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In her 15 years of royal protection, she had heard adults express similar sentiments. The weight of constant scrutiny, the exhaustion that came with perpetual performance. But hearing it from a 9-year-old child shattered something fundamental in her understanding of the role she was meant to play in Charlotte's life. Through the darkened windows, Sarah could see the confusion growing among the waiting crowd. Hospital administrators were checking their phones, probably receiving calls from palace officials demanding explanations. The media representatives were becoming restless, some beginning to speculate audibly about possible security threats or medical emergencies that might explain the delay. Sarah's radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Alpha 1, we have the Deputy Private Secretary requesting immediate status update. Multiple agencies are asking for clarification on the delay. Please respond with current situation assessment." Instead of reaching for her radio, Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and turned completely around in her seat, giving Charlotte her full attention. The action was symbolic as much as practical. She was choosing to prioritize the child over the institution, the individual over the schedule that governed their lives. "Charlotte," Sarah said, using the princess's name without the formal title for the first time since her assignment began, "look at me, sweetheart." The informality seemed to surprise Charlotte enough that she lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy from crying. In that moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a little girl who had been pushed beyond her emotional limits and needed an adult to recognize her distress and respond with care rather than demands for continued performance. "I know this is scary," Sarah continued, her voice steady and reassuring. "I know everyone expects things from you that feel too big and too hard sometimes. But, right now, the most important thing is that you're okay. Nothing else matters more than that." Charlotte sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand, an unconsciously childlike gesture that contrasted sharply with the formal behavior expected of her in public. "But everyone is waiting for me. The sick children, the doctors, all those people with cameras. Mummy says I have a duty to serve others. And I'm failing." The words revealed the depth of pressure that had been placed on such young shoulders. Charlotte had internalized the concept of duty to the point where her own emotional needs felt like selfish failures. Sarah recognized the dangerous path this thinking could lead to. She had seen other royals struggle with perfectionism, eating disorders, and mental health issues that stemmed from impossible standards set too early in life. Your mummy is right about serving others, Sarah said carefully. But part of serving others well means taking care of yourself first. You can't pour from an empty cup, and right now, your cup is empty. Outside the vehicle, the situation was escalating. Sarah could see additional security personnel arriving, their presence suggesting that higher authorities were becoming seriously concerned about the deviation from schedule. Her own career was likely in jeopardy. Royal protection officers who made unilateral decisions to alter planned engagements rarely survive the subsequent investigation and review process. But, looking at Charlotte's tear-stained face, Sarah felt a clarity she had never experienced before in her professional life. This child needed protection from more than external threats. She needed protection from a system that demanded adult-level emotional regulation from someone who had barely learned long division. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency. Alpha 1, this is Gold Command. You are ordered to provide immediate sitrep and proceed with scheduled engagement unless there is a confirmed medical or security emergency requiring evacuation. Sarah reached for her radio with steady hands. Her voice when she spoke was calm and professional, but carried an undertone of absolute determination that surprised even her. Gold Command, this is Alpha 1. I have a confirmed welfare emergency requiring immediate extraction of the principal. I am implementing emergency protocols and proceeding to secure location. The silence that followed lasted several seconds before Gold Command responded. Alpha 1, clarify nature of welfare emergency. Medical teams are standing by for deployment. Gold Command, the principal is experiencing acute emotional distress incompatible with public engagement. I am exercising my authority under Protection Protocol 7 to prioritize principal welfare over scheduled activities. Protocol 7 was rarely invoked and never for emotional distress. It was designed for situations where a principal's physical or psychological safety was at immediate risk. By citing it, Sarah was making a formal declaration that continuing with the hospital visit would cause harm to Princess Charlotte. Charlotte had listened to this exchange with growing amazement. No adult had ever prioritized her emotional state over her royal duties before. The palace staff were kind and caring, but they operated within a framework that assumed her compliance with scheduled activities regardless of her personal feelings about them. Are you really taking me away from here? Charlotte asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time that day. I am, Sarah replied firmly. But first, I need you to understand something important. This isn't about avoiding your responsibilities or duties. This is about making sure you're emotionally and physically ready to fulfill them properly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when you need help. Sarah started the engine, her movements deliberate and confident. She had made her decision and was prepared to face the consequences. Through the windshield, she could see the hospital administrators approaching the vehicle, their expressions confused and concerned. Gold Command, Alpha 1 is departing location. Please coordinate with hospital administration regarding rescheduling of engagement. Principal is secure and proceeding to base for assessment. The response was immediate and sharp. Alpha 1, you are ordered to remain in position pending arrival of senior protection officers. Do not move that vehicle. But Sarah was already reversing away from the hospital entrance, her years of tactical driving training allowing her to navigate through the confused crowd of media and onlookers with professional skill. The photographers rushed to capture images of the departing vehicle, their cameras flashing frantically as they tried to document this unprecedented deviation from royal protocol. Charlotte pressed her face to the window as they pulled away, watching the disappointed crowd grow smaller in the distance. Will I get in trouble for this? No, Sarah said with absolute certainty. You won't get in trouble. I might, but that's not your concern. My job is to protect you, and that includes protecting you from situations that cause you harm, even if those situations are meant to be positive. As they drove through London streets, Sarah's radio continued to crackle with increasingly urgent communications. Multiple agencies were now involved in trying to understand and control the situation. The hospital was asking for explanations to give to the waiting patients and families. The media was speculating about security threats or health emergencies. Palace officials were demanding immediate briefings on the nature of the emergency that had prompted such a dramatic departure from protocol. But inside the Range Rover, something remarkable was happening. For the first time in months, Charlotte was beginning to relax. The tension that had become her constant companion was slowly leaving her shoulders. She wasn't performing for cameras or maintaining perfect posture for observers. She was simply a little girl in the back seat of a car, being driven to safety by someone who had chosen to put her well-being above everything else. "Sarah," Charlotte said quietly, "thank you for listening to me." The simple words hit Sarah harder than any of the urgent radio communications demanding her compliance. This child had been grateful simply for being heard, for having an adult acknowledge that her feelings mattered as much as her duties. As they approached Kensington Palace, Sarah could see additional security vehicles already positioned at the gates. The consequences of her actions were waiting for her, and she knew that her career in royal protection was likely over. But, looking in the rearview mirror at Charlotte's calmer expression, she felt no regret. Sometimes protecting someone meant following orders. Sometimes it meant breaking them. And sometimes it meant smashing through every barrier, metaphorical or literal, that stood between a vulnerable child and the care she desperately needed. The morning rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as 9-year-old Princess Charlotte sat in the back seat of the Royal Range Rover, her small hands pressed against the cool glass. The familiar weight of royal duty pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible cloak she could never remove. Today marked another public appearance, another carefully orchestrated event where she would smile, wave, and be the perfect little princess the world expected her to be. Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews adjusted her rearview mirror, catching sight of the young princess in the reflection. Sarah had been assigned to Charlotte's protection detail 6 months ago, and, in that time, she had witnessed the gradual transformation of a once vibrant child into someone who seemed to carry the weight of the crown even before it was hers to bear. The seasoned royal protection officer had served the Windsor family for over 15 years, but something about Charlotte's recent behavior troubled her deeply. The princess wore a navy blue coat with perfectly polished shoes, her hair brushed to glossy perfection by the palace staff. Everything about her appearance screamed royal precision. But Sarah noticed the way Charlotte's fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed down her skirt. The child had been quieter than usual during the morning preparation, responding to questions with simple nods rather than her typically animated chatter. As they pulled away from the palace gates, Sarah observed Charlotte through the partition that separated the driver's compartment from the passenger area. The princess stared out the window with an expression far too serious for a child her age. Gone was the infectious giggle that once filled car rides, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that made Sarah's protective instincts sharp with concern. The destination was the Royal Children's Hospital, where Charlotte would visit young patients and help launch a new pediatric wing. It should have been a joyful occasion, something that would naturally appeal to a child's sense of compassion. Yet Charlotte seemed to shrink further into herself with each mile they traveled through London's busy streets. Sarah had worked with many members of the royal family over her career. She had protected Prince William during his university years, accompanied Princess and on countless engagements, and even served on Queen Elizabeth's detail during major state occasions. Each royal had their own personality, their own way of handling the pressure that came with their position. But Charlotte was different. She was still a child, still developing her sense of self, while simultaneously being molded into a future queen. The traffic began to slow as they approached the hospital. Sarah could see the crowd of photographers and reporters already gathering behind the barriers, their cameras ready to capture every moment of the princess's arrival. The media attention had intensified significantly over the past year as Charlotte began taking on more public duties. What once were occasional appearances had become regular commitments, each one scrutinized and analyzed by royal watchers around the world. Charlotte's breathing became more shallow as the crowd came into view. Sarah noticed the way the child's hands clenched into small fists, her knuckles white against the dark fabric of her coat. The princess had developed what the palace staff diplomatically referred to as pre-engagement anxiety, but Sarah recognized it for what it truly was: the overwhelming stress of a child forced to perform under intense public scrutiny. The Range Rover came to a stop at the hospital's main entrance. Immediately, the car was surrounded by photographers, their camera flashes creating a strobe effect through the tinted windows. The sound was muffled but constant, like mechanical rain against glass. Sarah turned off the engine and reached for her radio to coordinate with the security team that had arrived ahead of them. In the back seat, Charlotte remained perfectly still, her training evident in the way she maintained her composure despite the chaos outside. She had been taught since early childhood how to behave in public, how to smile even when she felt like crying, how to wave gracefully even when her arms felt heavy with exhaustion. The palace had invested countless hours in preparing her for moments exactly like this one. But children are not meant to be perfect all the time. Sarah completed her security check and received the all-clear from her team. The hospital staff was ready, the route had been secured, and the media had been positioned at appropriate distances. Everything was proceeding according to the carefully planned schedule that governed every minute of royal life. She turned in her seat to address Charlotte, following the protocol that required her to announce their arrival and confirm the princess was ready to proceed. That was when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A single tear had escaped down Charlotte's cheek, followed quickly by another. The young princess was crying silently, her shoulders trembling with the effort of holding back sobs. Her training held firm even in her distress. She made no sound that might alert the waiting crowd to her emotional state. But the tears fell freely now, creating dark spots on the collar of her pristine navy coat. Sarah's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. She had seen adults crack under the pressure of royal duty, seasoned diplomats, and experienced politicians who struggled with the constant scrutiny that came with association to the crown. But this was a 9-year-old child, and something was clearly very wrong. The standard protocol in such situations was clear: maintain the schedule, complete the engagement, address any issues privately afterward. The royal machine did not stop for individual emotional needs, no matter how young or vulnerable the individual might be. Hundreds of people were waiting inside the hospital, security arrangements were in place, and the media had already announced the princess's arrival to the world. But protocols meant nothing when Sarah looked at Charlotte and saw not a future queen, but a frightened little girl who needed protection from the very system designed to serve her. Without hesitation, Sarah made a decision that would redefine her understanding of what it truly meant to protect a member of the royal family. She reached for her radio and spoke in the calm, measured tone that had served her throughout her career in royal protection. "Control, this is Alpha One. We have a situation requiring immediate assessment. Princess Charlotte is experiencing distress, and I am implementing emergency protocols for the safety and well-being of the principal." The voice that crackled back through the radio carried the tension of someone dealing with an unexpected deviation from plan. "Alpha One, please clarify the nature of the emergency. Medical teams are standing by if required." Sarah looked again at Charlotte, who had turned her face toward the window to hide her tears from the cameras outside. The child's reflection in the glass showed a level of sadness that no amount of royal training could disguise. The photographers continued their relentless documentation of the moment, unaware that behind the tinted glass, a little girl was falling apart. "Control, the principal requires immediate privacy and assessment. I am securing the vehicle and requesting clearance to return to base." The response came quickly, carrying the authority of someone much higher in the palace hierarchy than the radio operator. "Alpha One, you are advised that deviation from scheduled engagements requires authorization from the private secretary's office. Please stand by for guidance." But Sarah was already moving. Years of training had taught her to assess threats and respond accordingly. And right now, the greatest threat to Princess Charlotte was not a physical danger from outside the vehicle. It was the emotional and psychological damage being inflicted by forcing a distressed child to perform in public when she clearly needed care and comfort. The detective inspector turned in her seat to face Charlotte directly, her voice gentle but firm. "Your Royal Highness, are you feeling unwell?" Charlotte's training demanded that she respond appropriately, that she maintain the facade even in her distress. But the kindness in Sarah's voice seemed to crack something deep inside her, and the tears flowed more freely. She nodded slowly, unable to trust her voice to maintain the careful modulation she had been taught. Sarah's decision crystallized in that moment. She had sworn an oath to protect Charlotte, and that protection extended far beyond physical safety. It encompassed the child's emotional well-being, her right to be a child rather than a perfect royal specimen, and her need for someone to recognize when the pressures of her position became too much to bear. The car doors remained locked as Sarah ignored the increasingly urgent communications from control. Outside, the crowd began to murmur with confusion as the scheduled appearance failed to materialize. Hospital administrators checked their watches and whispered among themselves, while photographers adjusted their positions to get better angles of the stationary vehicle. Inside the Range Rover, Sarah Matthews made the choice that would define her career and possibly change the trajectory of a young princess's relationship with royal duty. She was about to smash through more than just a car door. She was about to shatter the rigid protocols that demanded perfection from a 9-year-old child, regardless of the cost to her emotional well-being. The next few moments would test everything Sarah believed about duty, protection, and what it truly meant to serve the crown when the crown belonged to someone who was still learning to tie her own shoes.